Greetings, everyone. Welcome to our Facebook Live session this evening, Faith and Worship in a Digital Age. Greetings, everyone. Welcome to our Facebook Live. I'm hearing a voice.
Sounds so familiar. It sounds like yours. Good lesson. Turn on mute if you use another device. Technology. Funny story. Before we get going, we were recording these Preaching in the Wild sessions, and so we just did the one for Palm Sunday with Bob Earle, who's the deacon in Portugal Cove. And so I always set my timer on my phone to kind of let us know when we're at a half hour so we can wrap up. And I usually don't have a notification on, right? So with Bob, I forgot, and there was a tone. So half hour, ding, 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 ding. Oh, I'm so sorry. Anyways, I'm just going to share this as well before we get going. Okay, so faith and worship in a digital age. Let me give you a little bit of background before I introduce our panelists for this evening's session. So this semester at Queen's College, I've been teaching a course called Faith and Worship in the Digital Age. And it's a brand new course for us. And we've been exploring some of the theology and practice around digital technology and the way that the church uses those things. And really, all of this has been brought on by the pandemic for the last 2 years, when in-person worship was halted, and we very quickly had to migrate into online gatherings for worship, for Bible studies, for really anything that the church was doing. And we're still, I think, in some ways trying to figure out how we navigate our way through those things. And so part of the requirements for this course was to have a couple of local practitioners who would be part of a panel conversation around the last couple of years that we've experienced now with digital ministry, a bit of looking back, a bit of looking at where we are now, and maybe a little bit of looking ahead, focusing our conversation around creativity and best practices so that you, our panelists, can impart your esteemed wisdom and experience onto the future leaders of the church, some of whom are going to be going out into parish ministry very shortly. And also, this is a part of what I'm doing here, is a part of a research grant that Queen's College has received for this same title, Faith and Worship in a Digital Age, which is around creating resources to help prepare, again, local practitioners, both lay and ordained, to equip them for digital ministry in the 21st century. So this is why this particular conversation is happening. And I thought, rather than just doing the traditional, you come into class and speak to the class, why not make this as public as possible and use digital technology as a way to have this conversation? So that's why we're doing what we're doing. My name is Reverend Rob Cook, and I'm lecturer and director of outreach programs here at Queen's College. And as I just said, I'm the instructor for Faith and Worship in the Digital Age. And so I'm very excited to have two panelists with me this evening. Supposed to have three. Those of you who saw the poster for this, but my friend Tyler Cram, who's a pastor in Bay Roberts, found himself caught in the quandary in the in-between traditional parish ministry and digital ministry. He has someone at the hospital who is dying. And so he got called away to deal with that. And so I think that in itself speaks to where we are in terms of digital ministry, that in between, the in-person traditional stuff that we always do with these new emerging methods of conversation and education. So I'm going to let our two guests introduce themselves and say a little bit about where they're serving and why they're interested in these kinds of conversations. So let's begin with Miriam Bowlby.
Hi, everyone. My name is Reverend Miriam Bowlby. I'm the minister at Cochrane Street United Church in downtown St. John's. And I am there until the end of June, and then I'm going to be moving into some non-traditional work with the church, doing housing and property work with the United Property Resource Group. I landed in the pandemic not knowing very much about digital worship or technology. I knew the basics of, we had to have a Facebook page and social media, and I'd used YouTube occasionally. We at least had a channel, but it really sparked an interest in me and about how we can use technology to help share the good news of the gospel. So that's a really it's been a growing skill and interest for me over the past couple of years.
Yeah, and Miriam's also adjunct faculty member here at Queen's College. This term, she's teaching the Pastoral Leadership and Administration course, right? And those of you who follow our Facebook page, you may have seen some of the short little video clips that have come out of that class of people, parish leaders offering their best practices, advice around parish ministry. So if you haven't had a chance, just go back and look at some of those, some really good advice in some of those. Miriam's also my partner in crime when it comes to beer and hymns and the Open Table Collective and weird, wacky. Lots of times I'll text Miriam and I'll say, I have a crazy idea.
And I always say, I'm game, let's go.
So she's a good friend to have for those kinds of things. Great to have you, Miriam. Really, really excited. Also, we have with us Amber Tremblett. Amber, say a little bit about yourself.
Well, my name is Amber. I am a recent graduate of Wycliffe College in Toronto. And this past September started my first job in ministry, which is at the Parish of Lake Melville in Happy Valley, Goose Bay. So I'm the rector of St. Andrew's Church, and then I also do services every now and then in a church close by in Northwest River. And yeah, I'm from Lewisport in Newfoundland, and this is fun. I'm really happy to be part of this discussion because I, as a 25-year-old, grew up with technology but didn't really see it used in the church in a huge way, but have been fascinated or intrigued or inspired by how willing not all, but a lot of churches have been to take on this kind of new form of ministry. And I'm interested to see where it goes. So I'm excited to talk about it.
Yeah, and one thing you need to know about Amber is that she is going to be ordained a priest in just 2 days.
Yes.
So we're going to try it. We're going to make sure she doesn't say anything too out there this evening that the bishop might hear and then change his mind. But I mean, she's all the way down from Labrador now. She's actually in Lewisport. She's going to be ordained a priest in her home parish, which is wonderful, I think. I'm very fortunate to have family and friends around as she shares in that special occasion. And I have to be honest, I was a bit concerned when I looked at, the three people I had approached, and three of the four of us would have been from central Newfoundland because Tyler Cram, here, is from Botwood. So you have someone from Botwood, someone from Lewisport, and someone from Leading Tickles. Things could get really, really out of hand. So, like a shed party could break out. Like
possible, yeah.
I mean, I wouldn't rule that out right now. I mean, it's still
online shed parties.
Yes. Thanks, Amber. I'm really glad that Amber's here and she said yes to this because I think her perspective on this is really, really important. As someone who is new to ministry, entering this new world that we're in, you have a completely different experience than someone like myself and Miriam, who have had years of experience in the old model of ministry. And now we find ourselves scrambling and adapting in this new emerging model that we're in. So I'm really keen, and I'll come back to it, I'll circle back to it a bit later on, but your particular experience as a new, soon to be new priest, new deacon right now, new priest, because there are people in this faith and worship course that we're doing who are very soon going to be in the same situation that you're in. So your perspective is going to be really important, really keen. So I want to start off our conversation just with kind of like a general kind of reflection back on the 2 years that we've just experienced. We're just a little bit past the 2-year mark. I think it was somewhere around St. Patrick's Day of 2020 when we had our last in-person services before everything shut down and we moved to online services and those kinds of things. I wonder if you have any thoughts, just general kind of thoughts about the last 2 years. You know, how have we changed in that time? What's different about us now, if there's anything different about us?
I think we've become a bit more adaptable. Like when I was actually finishing my MBA when the pandemic was claimed, I wasn't even working in the church, but all of a sudden I was like, pandemic, oh my goodness, what are they going to do for church? I'm not sure how many people have the technological know-how, and I wasn't supposed to go back to church until beginning of May. And I said, well, I got to have church somehow for Easter Sunday. So figuring that out. So for me, it was a high learning curve initially for how that, but I think over the time, people have just adapted, and every time the rules changed, it's like, okay, how are we going to make church happen? And people are open to flowing with that. So, okay, right now we can't sing. Maybe we have one person singing, and how to use different technology effectively is something I've looked at. So we changed our order of service a little bit to accommodate the online because the attention span is less. Could we do more? Probably. But we've kind of modified in those kinds of ways. And I think just in general, people are more open to how they can attend worship in ways that work for them. Like a lot of people now are still in that limbo space where they're not sure that opening up completely is the right thing and are still kind of staying worshiping online because they don't feel quite safe going to church in person yet. And then we've gained a whole audience of people who join us online. And my question is, how do we connect with them? Like, how do we, when they're anonymous viewers, how do you connect with them? So I think we've learned a lot in the last 2 years.
Yeah. I think the adaptability thing is key for me, because the first 2020, 2021 was my last year of seminary, and I did it all through on a screen. So like I ate, I slept, I did school, I did everything from my residence room in Toronto. And in a lot of ways, that was very difficult. It is very difficult to only be online. For me, for some people, from like my experience, that was exactly what they needed to be able to make connections with people. Some people find it way easier to connect with people online than they do in person. But for me, that was, it was hard. But I was also, during that year, the student council president of my student body. So I had to completely put every single thing that they did in person online, and it had never been done before. So it was challenging in that way, how to conceptualize something that had not previously existed. And so I think I learned a lot about myself, particularly what as a person I am capable of doing, because on top of all that, you have all of the things that COVID did to a lot of us. Like mental health was not good in like my building in that time. for everyone. So that was, I think, the challenge. But you also learn a lot in that experience, that like your computer like can do so much. There's so much opportunity there. And being forced to think about it helped me. So like being forced to think about, well, like we literally cannot do this in person, so we need to find another way to do it. And like that really forces you to be creative. And then being able to like take that experience of having to be creative and then applying it to the ministry that I'm doing now, you're able to tap into that sort of, well, it is possible, because when we had to find a way, we did. So I think it was helpful in that way, but also very challenging.
Yeah, I agree with everything you both just said. And, I think back to the, especially the first year. I found that first year really, really difficult. I think it was probably the hardest year I experienced in parish ministry. And I think part of the reason was we were trying to do all these new things, learning how to do all these new things, but still trying to keep all the other stuff going too, right? And that's a good lesson for us moving forward. And it's actually something we were chatting about a little bit before we got going, around expectations and responsibility. And, as we find ourselves, I think now we're in a world that's hybrid, in person, online, or offline and online is the term. The textbook we've been using differentiates that way. Offline is what we would call in person, and online is online. I don't like the word virtual. To me, that sounds fake. But, as we move increasingly into a hybrid online and offline world, we have to be really careful about expectations, and especially on clergy, and some of it we put on ourselves, is having to do all this new stuff around digital technology, but then also trying to keep up all the old stuff we used to do, right? The old model and the new model. And, conversations around, well, what's the role of lay people in this as we move forward, right? And equipping lay people either to do some of the digital technology stuff, or to empower them to do some of the low tech stuff of visiting people, leading Bible studies, and, like those kinds of things. And right, you can't do it all. There's too much, right?
I'd add too, and I was thinking about it too, is in the first year, I felt that my creativity was really high, and I was really great at adapting things. And by the second year, I was like, my creativity's gone, and I'm tired from a year of adapting. And so that's another part of living for 2 years in pandemic, is people get tired. And your resources are not what they are when you first launched into it. And digital screen time is exhausting. Like, how much time can you spend on Zoom before your brain is fried? So yeah,
and you're looking at yourself,
I know,
all the time, right? And it's like you get the Zoom face, like where you're smiling all the time. Your face just freezes like that into a permanent
yeah, I found that too. Like I had a bunch classes like 4 times a week, and they were all 3 hours long on Zoom. So then like I did that and whatever, didn't really notice like what was going on. But then I graduated, and then the fall had like a 3-hour Zoom meeting, and I was done it. And I was like, oh my gosh, how did I do that for like days on end, months on end before? Because I'm sure people have written articles about it, like scientific articles, whatever, about like why that happens, but it's so different than, a meeting in person, I guess. But it's weird. It's weird.
I wonder if we could shift gears just a little tiny bit. One of the things that we have focused on in the course is conversations around community and what community looks like online and what community, traditionally look like offline, so to speak. I wonder if you have any thoughts on community in the last couple of years. And, maybe it's better for me to put it like this. Is it possible to create community online? Was that part of your experience of the last 2 years?
That was one of my challenges, really. I'm not sure I did it well, because I felt like I was best guessing and trying to use an old model of community building to fit into a new thing. So early in the pandemic, we'd have Zoom like coffee time chats so people could connect with each other. But when you have 20 people on Zoom at the same time, it's kind of challenging. So how do you modify that? The one community building space thing that I found worked really well was I did an online prayer group. And that worked really nicely on Zoom. And it was really great because I had people attending from all over the place, because it didn't require you to drive anywhere, be anywhere specific. You'd gathered in prayer. And so that was a nice community building. So I really think it is possible. How to do it well is an entirely different question, I think. And I think there's ways of doing it well, but I think we need to do it differently. And I'm not sure quite how that different looks.
Yeah, I agree. One of my main jobs as senior student was we need to maintain the sense of community at the school. And what a task. So we tried so many different things. We used Netflix Party to watch a movie, but not everyone has Netflix. And people are in different countries. So what if they don't have the movie? So then I'm like, what movie is on all Netflix countries? Googling that question, right? And then we did trivia, Zoom trivia, which worked kind of well. And then we played online games where you can get on your phone and everyone can be on their phone and participate in the same game. And that was fine, but some people's internet is slow. So you have all these different problems. So some of those things worked well and some of them didn't work so well. And it was a lot of trial and error, which is, I think, what you had to do when you're testing out new ways to build community. But one of the things that I really liked about building community online, and that I still like when I get the chance, is that you're not limited by space. So we had I used to run a women's dinner, a women in ministry dinner, and we had speakers from the Bahamas, speakers from across Canada, and would never have gotten them to speak at these events otherwise. So I think it provides a lot of opportunity that way. And even distance, when I was a senior student, even distant students at school felt more connected during that year than they ever did in the past, because everyone was online and they could talk to everybody, all of their classmates. I have always thought, like you, Miriam, that prayer groups are one of the things that work very well online. The problem that I have encountered is, especially in the communities, if we're leading Anglican parishes, well, if I'm leading an Anglican parish, is people don't know how to use Zoom. People don't have Zoom, and they're not going to make that effort to, and I'm not going to blame them for that, to get online and learn how to use a new thing to attend a prayer group when they could just as easily go in person, right? So that is the engagement piece is something that I've struggled with, because I even found that at Wycliffe, we would try different things, using social media in different ways, ask questions and people chat in the comments. No one wants to do that. There's engagement, I think, is the thing that I've struggled with, actually, is how to get people wanting to spend more time online.
Right.
When everything's online.
Yeah, I totally understand what you're saying there. But did you not feel that as the pandemic dragged on, you know, and we're in the pandemic's still going on, like, contrary to what public health and government officials might think, the pandemic is still going on. But so, like, as we saw that this was going to be with us for a long time, because in the early days, who knew?
Yeah.
I don't think anybody envisioned 2 years. I didn't, right? But did you find that as the time dragged on, that maybe some of those holdouts around technology gave in because they needed a technology, not necessarily to stay connected with the church, but with family and friends? I did see a lot of people who had swore to me that they would never, ever use Facebook, mocked anybody who used Facebook. And then they eventually had to, you know, give in and get Facebook. And all of the demographics around Facebook now show that the fastest growing cohort on Facebook, even before the pandemic, was those 65 and over, which is a big part of our demographic in the church. So did you notice a change as we kind of went further into the pandemic? Or are people just like, no?
Well, for me, it's interesting because I went from a community who was very much on board with technology into a community who is not so much on board. And I know that there have been some people in my community now who have gotten Facebook, I assume, because of the pandemic, to watch church online. But it's the other things. If we're going beyond just live streaming services, it's the other ways that technology can be used that I haven't seen the same interest in, we'll say. So if we're talking about using Zoom because if you're talking about like building a community, having every event be like on Facebook Live, like this one, is not going to work for everyone. People want like that intimacy. They want to be able to talk to the people that they know and not necessarily all of Facebook. So that format doesn't work for everything. And but they don't want to try or haven't tried or don't know about other options. So getting them on board with that, I think, is the kind of the next step, perhaps. And maybe those are not the people that we are reaching when we are doing online ministry. Maybe, and then it goes back to now we have more things we have to do. We have to continue the traditional, but we also have to do the online. And how do we do it all? So, yeah.
I kind of agree. I don't think there's been I think I had a high number of people who had technology and access to technology and could figure out how to use it, or had connections in their family who could help them use it. But then I have a whole population of people who don't have internet, don't have a device, and aren't going to get one. So like, how do you connect with that? So we had to, it's kind of old school, but we developed Phone Tree to keep people connected, because there are people who just couldn't. So sometimes you have to have use the technology that works for that particular generation and for your audience.
Yeah, and I think one of the things I've been trying to get the class to understand is, I think as we move forward now, the way we use digital technology is going to change and evolve again, because as we move, for the last 2 years, let's be completely honest, it was really out of a sense of necessity.
Yeah.
Right. There had been some, experimentation kind of before the pandemic came along. I know I had done some Facebook Live stuff. I hadn't used Zoom, but really the last 2 years, it's really been out of necessity. I think we've seen where there's potential, right? But I think moving forward, I think we're going to have to adjust and adapt what we've been doing for the last 2 years. Because I think, and Miriam mentioned this earlier, about, what we've done in the last 2 years, especially in terms of like live streaming worship, has worked okay because the people who are watching it are the people who would come to church anyways, right? So as buildings reopen and we get back more into the offline worship that we're used to, I think we're going to have to come up with creative ways to engage with people, say, who they're not going to come to church, but they're looking for something, some kind of spiritual community, or spiritual reflection, theological conversation, but to a live streamed hour and 15-minute service is probably not going to keep them, right? So I think, so what have we learned from the last year around creating community that can help us when we move forward into whatever these new unknown kind of frontiers really are? And I'd pause here for a second too, because people who are watching us on Facebook Live, I'd like for this to be as interactive as possible. So, I'd love to hear from people who are watching too, like, what is your experience of community, especially been in the last couple of years in terms of digital community? Did you feel connected? Right? Did you feel connected spiritually? Did you feel connected in terms of your faith community? Because I heard from a lot of people, and I'm sure Amber and Miriam heard these kinds of things too, that people did feel really connected. And some have said to me they felt more connected than they felt connected in years, right? Because there was just so much stuff available. Content is the word, is the digital technology word, right? There's so much content, whether it was church services or Bible studies or daily offices, book studies, prayer groups, all of this stuff. And you could connect with people, you didn't have to connect with people just in your little community, whether it was Happy Valley, Goose Bay, or Lewisport, or St. John. You could connect with people anywhere, anytime, right? That just, our understanding of community is just explodes when we look at it through the lens of digital technology, right? So, what have we learned from that experience that we can now help us as we move forward into whatever this next phase is going to look like? Because I think it is going to start to look differently. I think you're going to see fewer people, that little number that shows up on your Facebook Live, like it's on my phone here now, says there's 22 people who are watching, right? In the early days of COVID, that number was very high. Now it's not so high, and it's hard to engage people for very long.
Yeah.
Right? And I think if you go and look at your analytics on any kind of videos, you can see the drop-off rate.
Yeah, the retention rate.
It's low, very low, very low. It's always discouraging as a preacher. You notice that it drops off rate at the sermon.
Yeah. It's like you have 800 views, but 792 of them are like 7 seconds or less. You're like, okay, great.
Great. Yeah. And of course, you read about it, but like attention spans for digital consumption are a whole lot less shorter than they are when you're gathering kind of in the offline in-person world. So I think in the future, we're going to have to stop looking at, doing the hybrid thing necessarily. We can still do it, but we're going to have to adapt the content we put out there for shorter periods of time and shorter audiences and things like that.
We do. There's a comment about this idea of community, and it's from Debbie Panton, who is another brand new priest, just ordained this past Friday, and she says, I find especially my senior people feel connected. They like to announce that they are watching and saying good morning to one another, etc., and really enjoy staying connected when they're away visiting their children.
Yeah.
Right. We had a couple seniors who moved from Newfoundland out to Alberta to be closer to family, and they stayed connected through Facebook Live, through the Sunday and our Saturday services too that we did at St. Mark's. And I used to do a thing called community check-in, which is really, it started off as just gathering like this and having a chat, and I'd share any announcements and stuff that might be coming up, and then it evolved into almost more like a mini talk show that we did. But people felt connected that way, right? Debbie's saying something else. An interesting thing I've noticed is that some folks attend in-person worship in the morning and then watch online again later in the day. I think people are, and this might sound crass, but people are getting more church during the pandemic than they ever thought was possible. Like, I know some people who go by time zone, right?
Yeah.
Right? They watch their local, then they go on to the next one, and they're like at it for most of the day, right?
Watching church all day. Yeah.
But I mean, I think it's feeding people.
Need.
Right? We can't, I know in the early days, I was concerned about some of that stuff, and people are becoming consumers of church.
Yeah.
I don't know, maybe people are doing that anyways when they're sitting in the room. Like,
yeah, is it really that different?
How do you judge those things, right?
Yeah, and like, are we supposed to be the judges of it, right? Like, what are we're gonna get up and say that, like, you watching church from home, you're a consumer, but if you come in and do the same thing in a pew, you're somehow better than the person who stays at home and watches. And that's something that I found a little bit challenging, is some people think that way in our churches, in our communities, that, well, we're the ones coming, so we should matter more than the people who are watching from home. And I think the challenge going forward, one of the challenges, is how to explain to people or convince people, or whatever word you want to use, that those people watching from home are part of the community, and they are just as important to be included, and we need to remember them when we make choices about how we do ministry. So that is one of the things, like, that goes right down to how you live stream your service. Like, if we're just talking about that particular thing, like, they need to know what's going on. They need to be able to understand it from home and be able to participate in the way that a person who's in person can participate.
Yeah. One of the pieces of advice I've given to students in the Faith and Worship in a Digital Age course is that we'll likely continue to live stream in some form, but maybe what we need to consider is we would live stream the Sunday worship, but then throughout the week, take parts of that and re-share it. So maybe take your sermon, right? But then again, even 10 or 15 minutes.
Too much. Yeah.
Too much.
So I
take a hymn, take a prayer.
I had this other idea for TikTok, and I was on TikTok for about 5 minutes. My daughter actually downloaded the app, signed me up, and I was on there for 5 minutes, and I just got overwhelmed. I'm like, oh my God, this is way too much. But if I ever venture back in again, I have an idea for something called TikToks.
Right.
I would take the sermon or whatever I'm doing and try to boil it down into 2 minutes.
Right.
And engage people in a creative way like that, right? But I think there's ways that we can continue to do the traditional live stream because we've been doing it for 2 years now. We've always done
traditional digital ministry,
right? Do that, but then throughout the week, take, say, the favorite hymn or, you know, a particular beautiful prayer or something, you know, and use that. Like, say if you're someone from a tradition, like say the Pentecostal church that has testimony time, well, take somebody's testimony and put that, share people's story. Like, there's ways that we can engage throughout the week, but I think it takes a shift in the way we think. Right? I think we need to move away from thinking, okay, well, we live stream church, now we're doing digital ministry.
Yeah.
Right? That it takes a bit more intentionality than that, right? Yes. But then it comes back to who's going to do all this stuff.
And it takes planning too. Like, when you're, the thing about social media is, and I'm guilty of this. I totally do this. I have all my accounts set up so if you share it on Instagram, it shares on Facebook, it shares on Twitter. So I do a one thing, but really each of those mediums requires some intentional thought about how you use each, because they're different social forms of social media. So how do you intentionally use that? And even too, like entering into a season like Christmas or Lent or something like that, having an overarching plan that looks at how you're going to communicate those themes for an extended period of time. I did really well in some seasons, and in other seasons it's like, I can't do more Facebooks, because it's a time thing too. If you get a run of funerals, you don't have time to plan this week's social media or this month's social media posts. So how do you balance that, and how does it tell your church's story too, what you post and what you share? Like, you're communicating story of your congregation through your social media, so you want to make sure it's done well. But I don't know if we've really kind of explored in the church at large how to do that well.
That is something, like, I think there's so much room for churches to use social media in an intentional way, but people's full-time jobs are social media managers. And like, now I have to think about like how I'm going to run the church's social media on top of everything else. It's you can't do it. It's not possible, because like, and I get overwhelmed by it because I see how much you could do. And like, I could spend my entire week like focused on how to like post for Facebook and post for Instagram and stuff like that. And I think it is the way to move forward. Like we were saying, these different ideas about short videos on different topics or whatever. But how to do that, like physically as a person, is literally the challenge. I've been thinking a lot about the church website, and having a good website, and like having a blog. That's where you post sermons, and it being like very multimedia based, and having like different sections. Like, imagine if when the pandemic started, every church member could go to a website where everything about their church, and like some churches have websites that are that good, but a lot of churches don't. And one of the easy ways to it's not easy, it's a lot of work, but one of the ways to use social media is you make your post and then you say, go to our website, and then they go to the website and everything is there. But again, that's so much work, and it's like time that people don't have.
Yeah. And a skill set that's not necessarily
exactly
in the back pocket of every lay person in our congregations. So it's not an easy post to get a volunteer for.
Oh, 100%.
And you have to have someone overarching over the whole thing who's looking at making sure that while you're using different mediums, there's an overarching identity that matches your website, that matches your Facebook, that matches your Instagram, that matches your Twitter, and they all look the same. So people go, oh yeah, that's Cochrane Street United Church, and I know it because I see the same similar kind of content across the board.
Well, and there's also some work that would have to be done if you're going to use lay people. And I'm a proponent of using lay people, because you can't do it all, right? So either you have to have a conversation with your congregation to say they have to buy into this, right? And realize that this digital ministry is just as important as the ministry that they're used to, right? That the world has changed. People are in different places now, and digital, online is where most people are, right? So they have to buy into it so that either they can take up that ministry themselves, or they can take up the other parts of ministry that will then free you up to do the things that, and I would use this language for myself, that I feel called to do.
Right.
I feel called to engage with people through digital technology. Just as much, maybe a little bit more these days than I do the more traditional way, right? I think the church, when I say, and the bigger church too, needs to start thinking about vocations in a different kind of way, right? That we need to acknowledge that some people, and this has been articulated in our class by a couple of students, that they feel they have a calling to this kind of ministry, digital. How do we empower and equip people to do those things when it looks so different than what we're used to, right? Which has been the priest or pastor who leads church on Sunday, visits people with home communion, does funerals, administers the sacraments, those kinds of things. And those things aren't going away anytime soon. Those things are going to continue to need to be done. How do we raise up people who have the gifts and the calling to do the kind of things we're talking about, right? And it can't be just one person. It has to be really communities. How do we raise up communities that take this stuff seriously, and then say to someone like Amber, say, go and do it. Like set those people loose to dream and do the stuff that we think we know. It's not think, we know needs to be done, right? Let's shift gears a little bit. Because one of the things I wanted to talk about was around creativity. And I think one of the good things about digital technology is that it does allow, I think, for greater creativity than probably we're used to or allowed to use when it comes to more traditional offline forms of ministry. So, in looking back, maybe from your own community, your own ministry, or from something else that you saw during the pandemic, what inspired you during the pandemic in terms of digital ministry? Or maybe it was something even before the pandemic came along. We didn't even know anything of, like, COVID. Like what have you found inspiration in? I would say it's the same thing for people who are watching too. I'd love to hear from people, like what inspired you in terms of digital ministry.
I did a whole series at the beginning of the pandemic, and I think we carried it on for about a year, called Worship Wednesdays, and they were short worship services, about 10, 12 minutes max, that were designed specifically for like online. So it wasn't traditional church. We had a prayer, short reflection on something that seemed connected to what was going on, connected to scripture. And I did these things called visual prayers because, of course, it's a visual medium. So I hooked together images and words and prayers. And I sometimes took scripture readings and did the same thing and put images to them. And I found that really, I learned a lot about video editing doing that, but also just how to connect the words of faith with images that were beautiful and powerful. And there's so many great tools to help you do that. Like Canva, I love, because when you're a charity, you can get access to their free stock pictures, and there's amazing things in that. So that was one of the things I really enjoyed being creative with at the beginning of the pandemic.
Yes, yay for Canva.
Oh yeah, Canva is like your best friend. Oh,
I don't think there's a site I use more, to be honest.
Yeah.
Anything you would add to that, Amber?
Not really. I think it's funny that you mentioned video editing, because I've never done more in my life than I have. I did 2 video editing courses in my undergrad at university, and I used them more in the past 2 years than I had before. But yeah, I've been inspired by people's, I mean, and we mentioned this at the very beginning, people's willingness to adapt. Mm-hmm. I'm not historically a very adaptable person. I don't go with the flow very well. So to like see, see people be able to adapt in that way. Like over Christmas, we were going to do a Sunday school Christmas pageant in person for the first time because I didn't get to do it in 2020. And then of course, everything was shut down. But we filmed it and they switched it to an online thing like in overnight. And it was like, and if we can do that, then it makes me excited about what we could do in the future by intentionally choosing online things, which like we said, we haven't been doing lately, but there's an opportunity there to choose to do online ministry. And I want to explore that more. So, yeah.
Yeah. And Susan Shepard, who's one of the students, she's auditing the Faith and Worship in a Digital Age course. She's a United Church minister. She makes a good point. And I did ask her to say more in the comments about what she said, but I know what she means by it, but maybe we could chat about it a little bit here. She talks about getting out of the building, that one of the good things about the pandemic, the good things about digital ministry, and one of the things too that I think was good for creativity and was inspiring was the ability to get out of the building. And like, it's like we were dragged kicking and screaming out of the building. But I think it showed us something that we knew we needed to do.
Yeah. But
being stubborn like we are, because most of us, Amber, are like you. We are averse to change and adapting and being stretched and challenged. But it took a global pandemic to get us to move outside of our buildings, right? To engage in worship even outside of our buildings, right? Yeah. That's what I got really disappointed when restrictions started to ease and all of our focus shifted to going back into the building.
Yeah.
Right? I thought, man, did we not learn anything from this?
It made beautiful things possible. Like I think about when you were talking about get out of the building, I thought about the Earth Day service that you, Tony, and I put together. Well, if it hadn't been for the pandemic, we probably never would have collaborated. But then you've got 3 different denominations in one service, and the same with our joint Ash Wednesday service. Highlight still burning the palm branches outside, getting ready for the service. But it was possible for us to worship together because we were digital, because normally, you know, a Roman Catholic priest, an Anglican priest, United Church minister wouldn't be able to do a joint service in that same, because we'd have our own responsibilities in our own church buildings and our own church places. But when you don't have the building and are limited by that, I think it opens up possibilities for collaborations that may not have been possible in the past.
Yep. And to go back to Susan Shepard, she did say a couple other things about getting outside the building. She said, she gives a couple of examples. Going to a location which is related to the scripture reading, like for example, Psalm 23 by a still pond, stories about a seed and growing things in a greenhouse. Yeah. And she also gives a very intriguing example, a baptism in my garden using the bird bath as the font. Right? So we're only limited in digital, ministry. We're only limited by our creativity.
Yeah.
Debbie Panton says, Bishop Jeff likely did not suspect this when he said the church has left the building. That was one of his themes a few years ago. Little did he know.
Yeah. That the church would leave the building.
Yeah. And another one of our students from the Faith and Worship course, Charlotte Toyne, she said, I was inspired by the way there was a church where the preacher did the sermon, but it was in the setting of sitting at a table and talking to you. Kind of like the table talks of Martin Luther. There was no notes, no formal church setting. It was just a home, and the preacher was great at drawing you in with his personality and speaking. The preacher did not hide behind a pulpit, but sat and felt genuine and vulnerable. Right? I mean, there's something disarming about the table anyways, right? When you sit at table with people. To me, that's one of the learnings of it. Reaffirmed to me the importance of the table, this whole pandemic and digitality. And one of the things I'm exploring in my own PhD research is how do we recover a sense of hospitality by putting the table again at the center of what we do, reimagining that table. But then what does that look like in the digital world?
Yeah. What a great question.
Right? How do we translate hospitality into a digital medium and recover a sense of the table? Because I think the table has to be central to what we do.
Definitely.
Right? And reimagining the Eucharist even, right? That it's not, it is, yes, the body and blood of Jesus, but that the table itself is sacramental. And, that anytime we gather around tables. So thanks for people sharing those things. We're running out of time. It's amazing how fast time goes when you're having fun, right? So there's two other things I wanted to just run by you real quick. And still, this is more looking back, and my last thing is going to be about looking ahead. Say if we had some magical new technology, someone develops finally time travel, and you can go back and you can do things differently, fix things that you wish you had done at the time. What would you do differently in terms of this pandemic and digital ministry in particular? Like, if going back, knowing what you know now, all these experiences, if you go back, what would you do differently, if anything? Maybe you wouldn't do anything differently. Same thing for the people who are watching online. What would you do differently?
I would not have recorded each individual part of the church services in separate videos and then having them edited. I would have totally gone straight to show up, record the whole thing live, because editing videos piece by piece like that was a time killer. And we did church like on the fly live every Sunday. How much time did I spend re-recording a prayer that I stumbled over 2 words in, when on Sunday morning I regularly trip over words and say the wrong thing, and I don't do a do-over. We just keep going. So I think taking some of that stress and of the making things, because you can, making things as perfect as possible.
That's the one thing that still concerns me. This is not my answer to the question, but I'm interested in what you said. That's the one thing that concerns me about digital ministry is like so much of the content we see is perfected, and it is like not a real version of what life is. Yeah. So my concern for digital ministry would that churches would fall into that trap of making everything look perfect and making it like not what it seems, and that erases vulnerability like that. And so that's my concern for digital ministry. Something I would do differently is I would, especially during this last shutdown in Gooseberry where I am now, I would have tried to engage with youth more online. Youth are much more comfortable online than even I am. They're better at it than all of us are combined. And I think that it is an opportunity in a church, in the Anglican Church, that is quickly losing youth, For whatever reasons, I think that engaging with them online is an opportunity that I've missed and still miss. But not even just engaging with them online, but involving them in online ministry. So like they have ideas, they know things about like the digital space that I don't know. They know how to use it, and they would know how to use it better than me. So I think we miss a lot when we don't value the creativity that they have and the voices that they've always had, but know how to use especially well in the digital world. So
yeah,
I do differently.
For me, there would be two things that if I could go back, I would do differently. One, we referenced earlier, and that's about I would have paced myself a little differently. Like I wish there was someone who every time I had an idea, a crazy idea, would have taken me by the shoulders or slapped me upside the head and said, listen, you have too much on your plate right now. File it away somewhere else or share it with someone else. Right? Share it with one of your colleagues to say, I have this idea. I don't have the time to do it right now. Maybe you do. And that's one of the things I did hear from other clergy was, not having the inspiration. And so having a way to share ideas and resources is key, I think, to the sustainability of digital ministry for anybody, right? So that's one thing I would do differently. I'd pace myself much differently, because by the time we went from March to my summer vacation that year in August, I was very close to burnout. Yeah. Very, very close to burnout. And it was my own fault. It was completely my own fault, because we have this complex as clergy where we want to fix everything and be there for everybody. And so in the time of a global crisis like the global pandemic, you want to be there for everybody. And, it takes a big toll on you. The other thing I would change if I could go back and do it all over again is I would have been much less likely to do anything from the church. I think I would have done way more stuff like this, or the things that Susan Shepard was talking about, right? Yeah. To take advantage of that moment to draw people out from the building. Yeah. And say, we don't need this physical building to be the people of God. We really don't. And here's how we're going to do it. And to be more creative in the way that we did the Sunday part of church. And some people did that, right? They were very creative about those things and were intentional in doing those things, about saying, if we can't gather in the building, it doesn't seem right to have, a select few in the building doing these things, right? And it was a great time to explore our spirituality, and this is especially true for Anglicans, beyond the Eucharist. Yeah. Right? We were so formed by the Eucharist, like say, for us with the Book of Alternative Services. So from like the mid 80s up until now, we completely revamped our identity as Anglicans, and where we used to be more shaped by the daily offices, and became totally shaped by the Eucharist, where to the point where most people never saw a morning prayer or an evening prayer or an evensong or anything, right? And so it was an opportunity, and I don't know if we really took full advantage of it, to explore our spirituality beyond the Eucharist. Now, I'm still Eucharistic to a fault, but I think there's more and I'm not even going to get into the topic of, can you do Eucharist?
No. A whole other thing.
That's
the Open Table Collective conversation on said topic.
And maybe, it's worth having a conversation, but that whole conversation I find is so fraught with landmines, and, you don't want to come across as speaking for the entire tradition that you're a part of, right? Just let me look at the comments and see if there's anything else there from anybody. Susan, gave up on do-overs really early, except when telephone rings or a dog goes ballistic. But for me, early on, one of the reasons I didn't want to get dragged into the whole editing thing, so we did exclusively live, like, right? And but I also remember early on having the experience of being so nervous when we were live streaming, and way more nervous than I would be if we were just, in the room. Finally, I had to get to a point where, like, nothing really has changed other than there's this camera in front of you now. Just be yourself, like, just relax. And then I was able to let my own personality come through, because even people would say to me, like, you don't seem like you're like yourself, you're too uptight. And I was using notes more than I normally would. And it's fine. I just had to kind of let go and let God. So the final question for the evening. So now let's look forward a little bit. And again, this is for anybody who is watching. How will digital technology change your ministry moving forward? Right. So we've talked a lot about our experience of the last 2 years. As we move forward now, and it's hard to know really what anything is going to look like. We hope we're past lockdowns and tight restrictions and those kinds of things, but you don't know. But as you look forward, how do you think digital technology is going to change the way you do ministry, or maybe even the way you understand community, or if you want to get really theological, the way you understand God and how God is present, right? So that's a big, huge question. So you can pick out whatever you want there and just reflect on it a little bit. And the same goes for people who are watching.
That's a really hard question. I think going forward, I'd like to see more intentionality on how we use digital ministry. Right now, I feel like I'm kind of haphazard in it, but I'd like to see more intentionality in it. What can we do that communicates the gospel message, does it in a way that's suited for the medium? What can we do that helps build that sense of community in a digital space? How do we, and I don't have any of the answers for these things, but they're my looking ahead kind of things. How can we create that feeling of worship and praise and gathering in God's presence in a format that honors the tradition, but is designed for social media? So it can't be long. Like we're used to an hour-long format. How do we reconfigure things so we get the same kind of prayerful, worshipful experience, but in a way that is suited for the digital world? Those are some of my initial thoughts. I may have more. I don't know. See how the conversation goes and what it triggers.
It's totally okay to answer a question with more questions. I mean, we follow a dude who did that.
So true.
Often.
Right? So it's totally, and I think there are right now more questions
definitely
than there are answers. For moving forward, we have some kind of, I think, vague ideas of what it might look like. I think one thing, and I let Amber speak after this, but one thing is, hopefully for everybody, that digital technology will continue to be a part of what we do in some way, shape, or form, right? Because we are in a digital world now. Your banking is online. Increasingly, people are using things like Zoom to stay in contact with family and friends all over the world. We're getting our news through social media. Increasingly, people hardly ever watch the evening news anymore. So it is everywhere in all aspects of our lives. So it's not going anywhere. And I don't think it's an option for the church to bury its head in the sand and say, okay, we don't need to do that anymore. Pandemic's over. Let's move on to, no, it is here to stay. How can we best use it? Maybe is the best question, right?
Yeah, that's the first thing I was going to say. Well, there's not a future where I don't use it, because like it's almost necessary. Even the basic thing of having a Facebook page is more necessary now than it was before the pandemic. Like you need one in order for anyone to know like where you are or what you're doing. I get so frustrated when a church or a business or something doesn't have like an up-to-date Facebook page or an up-to-date website. So like that tells me that is obviously something that other people also, like if I'm upset about it, then other people obviously are too. But yeah, the other thing that I've been really thinking about for like the future of digital ministry is, we know that people who wouldn't go to church in person are engaging in worship online in whatever way. But how do I reach those people?
Yeah.
How do I create relationships? How do I connect with those people? Because like as a pastor, they can't just come in and like that's not enough. Like we need to form relationships with them. That's what Jesus calls us to do, form relationships with each other. And a relationship is two-way. So they're worshiping with us, which is an amazing first step. They're engaging in the content we create, whatever it might be in the future. But how do we connect with them?
Yeah.
I think is the biggest question that I have. And one that I genuinely, like other questions, like I have ideas, I genuinely don't have a real answer to that one.
Yeah, and Paul Walsh, who's watching on Facebook Live, he's a student in the Faith and Worship course. He asked a couple of really good questions here. I don't really know if we have time to do them justice, but I think these are the kinds of questions we need to reflect on moving forward. He says, can we ever marry or connect those who want to be in person with those who want to be online? Or are they separate communities within our faith community, right?
Excellent question.
The faith community, and then within that, is there going to be an offline community? Right. And is there going to be an online community, right? It's really not that different than, say, a multi-point parish.
Or 9 o'clock service and 11 o'clock.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So is that the way we need to think about this, right? That you're going to have your in-person congregation that meets in a traditional way, but do we have to find ways to create online communities? And they're online, right?
Yeah.
Likely not going to meet. And I know one of the students who's watching, and she's made a couple of comments there, Sue Squires. She is one of those people, I think, that feels called to that second kind of community. Right. That's online, that meets in those parameters. And because I think you do create community, there's a different way to go about creating community in that model than, say, in person. Some of the stuff is transferable, right? You always have to be welcoming and open and friendly and those kinds of things. But there's particular things that go into creating an online community. Authority is very different online, right?
Oh, yeah.
The fact that we're ordained online doesn't mean a hill of beans. Right?
We're all the same size square box.
Right, exactly. Right? So, but this is where digital technology and digital ministry challenges traditional structures around authority and leadership and who's got power and control, right? So there's a lot of really complicated issues that we're going to continue to wrestle with as we move forward, that it's not just as simple as pushing go live and then you're streaming your service. Yeah. That's fine. And I commend parishes that got to that point and have done it faithfully and consistently over the pandemic. But I think moving forward, the conversation is going to have to be a little bit more nuanced than that, right? Yeah. Then there's the whole negative side around social media. They're run by giant corporate conglomerates.
Other problems.
Right? That are mining people for their personal data to sell it to the highest bidder. And that's something very dehumanizing about that. And so as much as it's a technology, it's a tool that we use, there's also a prophetic role, I think, for the church to speak out against those kinds of things. What does social justice look like
in a digital space.
That is an interesting question, because the other thing that I've been coming back to is like, not everyone has the means to engage online. Like people don't have computers, people don't have smartphones, people don't have internet. And like, we're reaching certain people online, but we're not reaching other people online. So having to balance of making sure online ministry becomes one facet of everything else.
Yeah. And maybe I'll give the last word to Susan Shepard, because she has given us some great insights this evening. Maybe we should have invited her to
the panel.
She says, if we discontinue our online service, we leave behind the people who cannot attend in person for any number of reasons. And to which Paul Walsh responds, absolutely more accessible.
Yeah.
Right? And that's one thing we didn't talk about, is how digital ministry, digital worship does make us more accessible to people who, for whatever reason, it could be disabilities,
100 reasons,
mental health issues, transportation. There's all kinds of reasons why, we're so ableist.
Yeah.
In the way we think.
Yeah.
We're so everything we do is centered around car culture, right? That if you're going anywhere, you get in your car and you drive to wherever you want to go. Well, that's not a possibility for a lot of people. And for a lot of people, they don't want that to be a possibility.
Right.
Right. They're trying to find ways to lessen those kinds of things. And then there's the whole thing around mental health issues, social anxiety, right? That walking into a room of, depending on what church you're in, 20 to 100 to 200 strangers is paralyzing.
Yep.
To some people, right?
And also for the people who have absolutely no church experience, walking through church doors for the first time. I can't even imagine, like, when do I stand up? When do I sit down? What are the rules? When you have no background, it's like so much easier to walk through a digital door.
Especially if you're young. If you walk through church doors and you're a young person, and God forbid, if you have young children with you,
my gosh,
will be falling all over you.
Yeah.
Because they think, ooh,
new blood.
Yeah. It's not comfortable.
No.
to do that.
Yeah. Listen, I hate to cut this conversation short, because it is wonderful and so relevant to everything that's going on in the church right now, and the future that's before us. Thank you too for being with us this evening. Thanks to those who joined us online and joined in the conversation. It's wonderful, and I'm sure it will go on. I know part of our commitment at Queen's College is to find more ways that we can engage in these kinds of conversations, because we recognize that the future of the church is digital in a lot of ways, right? There will be no substitute for, flesh and blood, interactivity, but digitality. And the two aren't mutually exclusive, I don't think, right?
Yeah.
Right? I keep saying to the class, what we're doing here, this is not magic, right? There's not little Zoom fairies, right? This is physical, wires, satellites, computer. This is physical hardware that makes all this stuff happen. We're still connected physically and spiritually.
Yep.
In the same way, we're connected physically and spiritually if the three of us were in the same room. Yep. Right? So thank you all, and take care, everyone. Peace.
Bye.